And let's talk now to Sir Peter Fahey, who's former Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police. Sir Peter, really good to have you on the programme. I mean, first of all, let's talk about this case itself. It was a huge amount of manpower to investigate this. It took the hospital a long time to admit they needed the police to go in and look at statistically why there were so many neonatal deaths on their wards. How hard is it for police to investigate something like this in a hospital?
I think, quite a number of members of the public will not really understand why it took so long or even why the trial took so long. But the fact is, you are operating on the edges of medical science. This is such a unique event, so there isn't a huge amount of research. You find that different experts may disagree about it. All the evidence in the case was circumstantial. There was a huge amount of circumstantial evidence, but it was all circumstantial. Some of it are very complex and technical. So again, you have to be able to present it in a way that the jury will actually understand. And of course, there was then the number of victims. So, that's why it was so incredibly complex and why it took so long. And obviously for the investigating officers, it's very much a learning exercise for them. There ain't too many other detectives they can talk to who have dealt with cases like that. I mean, in a way, you've got Beverley Allitt. We had one in Greater Manchester at Stepping Hill Hospital, but that was about a guy who was killing very elderly people, but again, people who are very, very frail and where there wasn't a lot of, evidence and research. When you're trying to work out, okay, this action someone has taken is undoubtedly harmful, but was it so harmful that you can actually show that it directly caused the death of this person? And that's, part of the complexity of this case. So, we are literally talking about a handful full of people like Letby across the world. And so in terms of interviewing her and everything else, this will have been incredibly complex for the officers. I think they've done an outstanding job, but their investigation will have taken a great deal of time. They'd had to consult different experts, specialist barristers. Again, that would be, very hard to find barristers who are used to a case like this. So that was a learning curve for them. And ultimately, they had to prove it beyond all reasonable count, all reasonable grounds on every single count, which again adds to the complexity.
I mean, that is the difficulty, isn't it? It's not good enough to say, well, she happens to be there. She was one of the nurses who was on that ward and she seems to have been in the room or near the room whenever a baby had died. And of course, as you said, this is a novel murder weapon, if you will. In many cases, injecting air into the bloodstream, very hard, of course, to detect. And learning, of course, that she had completed a training course which highlighted the dangers of air embolos, which may have been her inspiration for this, but incredibly difficult when you're not, following a trail of hard evidence to be able to pin this on somebody. And very difficult, I'd imagine, for the police officers investigating this. I would assume that a lot of them have been quite traumatised themselves about some of the interviews they've conducted, some of the information they've learned.
I'm sure, and undoubtedly the most difficult part was, when they had to go and knock on the doors of a number of parents who believed that their baby had died from a medical cause, to then have to break the news that they may have died, from a criminal act, from somebody who was supposed to be caring for them. So that would have been enormously difficult. And I know, again, to be fair, the hospital did pay tribute to the great victim care and the care of the families that the Cheshire Constabulary have actually provided. But, that would have been incredibly difficult for the dedicated family liaison officers and absolutely for the officers that were investigating the case.
Now, we know that Letby will spend the rest of her life behind bars, but there are reports or suspicions, at least, that there could be far more babies who were attacked. Perhaps she wasn't successful in killing them. I mean, is it worth opening those files now and saying, to give the parents some sort of peace of mind of what may or may not have happened, to be able to investigate or do an inquiry into any failings in the hospital? Is it worth reopening those as attempted murder cases, or is the fact that she's now facing a life in prison enough to say, that will be a huge amount of resources and a very difficult investigation?
No, I think you've given the two reasons there why absolutely that has to be done. Number one, for the families involved, that they get a proper explanation, and absolutely, again, to understand why this was not discovered, why nobody noticed it, and to see if there's anything new in those cases which wasn't there in the other cases which she was convicted. So absolutely that needs to be done. And I think absolutely the primary reason really is for those families to get as far as is possible, a fuller explanation of what happened, because they're going to have that lurking in their mind, if not at the absolute front of their mind, and that needs to be resolved as far as it can be.